Hi guys, and in today's video I'm talking about two concepts which I think when paired together work incredibly well in the workplace, and I'll probably touch on how they can work very well outside of the workplace as well. So the first is asynchronous. What does that mean? Well, you have synchronous activity, which is two things happening at the same time. So, for example, when you're having a meeting with someone, you're talking with them, and you're both in the meeting, synchronously at the same time. And then asynchronous is the opposite of that, when two people achieve the same activity in their own time. So in the world of work, synchronous work is everybody going into the office, and asynchronous work is well, actually, no, let's rewind. Asynchronous work is everybody working at the same time, in the most traditional sense, in the same place. So synchronously in an office. Asynchronous is the more extreme of that. It's sort of remote work, working whenever you want. So someone might be working from, I don't know, Thailand. They're working from in the middle of the night. In the UK, they're working GMT 9 to 5, and in the US, they might be in New York and they're working from whatever, much later. But all the work is happening, but it's just happening asynchronously. And the reason I like this is because when done with global teams, you can be set a task at 6 p.m. in the UK, everyone's gone home, or 7 p.m., everyone's gone home, and um, you can sort of email a team, whether they're behind you or in front of you, and you might be able to get the work the next day. So, for example, you can email people in the Philippines or in Thailand, or indeed in India, um, and you might be able to get the work sooner, if that makes sense. Um, so that's sorry, I was just thinking through these things. The second concept is something called asymmetrical. So asymmetrical things are when you put in a small amount and you get a big return. So people talk about asymmetric risk. People talk about asymmetric risk and return. What is that? Well, in a positive sense, asymmetrical risk might be, for example, um, the risk of going walking every day is very, very low, but the returns are very high. You reduce risks of cardiovascular disease and a whole bunch of health risks. But that's kind of asymmetric return on an activity. And in the work concept, I'll give you a really good example. I'm actually working at a global firm at the moment. They have revenue in the billions. I might actually have a look in a moment. And there was a task that I wanted to do. The team's been around for 4 years, 3 or 4 years, and it's a global team. I'm in charge of not exactly me, but I'm overseeing 40 countries. There are about 6 or 7 country leads, but I'm overseeing all of that activity. There's around 40 countries, um, roughly 1,000 products, something like that, between 700 and 1,000 product SKUs. It's a CPG, a consumer packaged good company. And I just wanted to ask a silly question like, how many agencies do we have? How many agencies are working for us? So how many suppliers do we have globally? And I asked the team, and nobody knows. But I've seen the budget, and the budget is a seven-figure budget for suppliers. So then I thought, well, how do we find this out? And I thought, well, asymmetric activity to get to this task. The goal is find out who the suppliers are, find out how much they're charging, and then find a smart way of reducing cost and increasing output. Which, there are several ways to do this. We could be using centralization, we could be thinking about automation, we can think about better processes and systems, but I'm not going to go into that detail. I'm just going to talk through the asymmetrical activity and how you can think of levels to improve your work to get to outstanding results. So the first level, the crappiest level, is me doing all of the work. So what would I have to do? I'd have to email all the geo leads, which is, and probably all the countries, to be honest. They would then have to, if there's 6 or 7 country leads. Some of them cover regions, so that there's a Europe region. She has 20 markets under her. So there's about 7 of those people. I have to have calls with them, email them. They would then have to speak to all the countries. Um, and then I would have to probably have meetings with all the, some of those countries. There'd be loads of emails, hundreds of emails. Um, so that's the worst scenarios. That's probably, and if you think of all the people that need to work there in that scenario, you've got maybe 40 countries. They probably have to email the marketing manager. The marketing manager probably needs to then speak to all the agencies to find out how much they're paying, blah, blah, blah. So you've got hundreds of people doing at least an hour's work, maybe 2 to 3 hours work in total. So we're talking 300 hours. That's awful. So my first idea was fine. I'll share it with my team. There's 6 of people in my team, and then they can speak to the country managers. But still, that doesn't really, it reduces my workload because maybe I'll have to do a few hours. But then we're just pushing everything on to the country managers who still have to do the same thing. They may know that work a bit easier. And if they get it from somebody in the marketing team rather than me, it'll be a bit quicker because they've got the relationship already. And it might be a bit quicker. Instead of it being 100, 200 hours, it might go down to 50 hours work overall. But then I thought of slightly outside the box, and this is where asymmetry thinking comes into play. And you sort of have to think about, is there a better way of doing this? And I came up with a better way. So the better way in this regard, and it's just about auditing suppliers, but you can, if you start to think in this way across your life, and I'll give some asymmetric risk returns examples in later on in this video. But in terms of the work context, I thought, well, there must be a finance system. So I asked my manager, is there a central finance system? Do you use a finance system by geo? And then do you break it out by service? And it turns out they do. So I sent an email to the head of finance, and I asked them, can we get a breakdown of all the suppliers, how much they've cost, how much they've charged per service for 2024? And then the last activity is, I assume he'll give me a pivot table and he'll give me the raw data. And then the only thing we'll need to do is try and ascertain which one's, a marketing agency, which one's a creative agency, which one's doing events, etc., etc. And it's a much easier ask. So we can then just email that sheet to the country leads, and it's probably 10 minutes work or something for each individual person. So if there's 30 people involved, it goes down to 5 hours work rather than 50. So that's asymmetry. So we've got, and in terms of my work and my team work, it goes down to basically 0. So we've gone from 50 hours work, maybe 200 hours work, 100 to 200 hours work, down to, the second level was 50 hours work. The next is maybe 5 hours work, and none of which is in my team. So, and it's also asynchronous because I figured this out on a Saturday. I've emailed the guy. He'll probably pick it up on the Monday. He'll probably do it sometime this week. And I'll have the most comprehensive map of agencies that has ever been produced at this company. And I've been at this company 5 days. Why has nobody done this? Apparently, the discovery of suppliers happens typically when somebody's having a conversation, when they're doing a big campaign in another geography, launching a product, and they just ask, do you have any agencies involved? So nobody knows how much they're spending, the quality of the agency, the services provided. Nobody's thought this through. So that's my job, which I'm not complaining about. I think it's brilliant, and I love thinking these things through. How do you apply this in your personal life? So asymmetry is also used. So the best kind of thinking is done through asymmetry. So if we think about business, people think about return on capital or return on investment, and that's basically asymmetry related to capital investment. So it's like software, for example, software companies tend to have high asymmetric risk because you produce the software once, but then you can sell it to everybody around the world. A good car company can produce the same car around the world as well, although there's high capital expenditure with car companies, not like software companies. With CPG companies, packaged goods, you produce the good once, and if it's a hit, you can sell it all around the world forever. So they have good asymmetric risk as well. But in your personal life, what's what's good asymmetry. If you get very good at understanding the interest rate market, your life can be exponentially better off. So on my YouTube channel, I've got a kind of finance investing YouTube channel called Progress is Everything, where I just talk about my ideas in related to companies. Anyway, in 2021 and 2020, I talked to people about stock markets crashing and inflation. So I fixed my first mortgage in 2020 at 1.8% for 5 years. That was my first residence, which I now let out for investment purposes. And that's at 1.8%. Then in 2021, I produced lots of videos about how landlords and individuals should fix their mortgage rate. That was Q4 2021. I fixed two other mortgages at about 2%. And what happened is I predicted interest rates between 4 and 6% in the UK. The rest of the market predicted 2%. Interest rates at the time were 0.1. And nobody foresaw inflation. I shouldn't say nobody, but not many people foresaw the inflation that I did. And granted, I didn't do the smart thing. I didn't find out how to do interest rate swaps, where you can. It's a financial sort of instrument to bet on interest rates. I didn't do that. The only thing I did was I fixed three mortgages. So I effectively have saved somewhere in the region of 100 to £200,000 after tax. So somewhere in the region of £400,000 is how much I saved, which isn't bad. But the asymmetry comes in not in just the finances. Of course, saving 300 or 400,000 or whatever the number is incredible. But really, people don't always just think about their lives in terms of money. They also think about value. So what I've been able to do in my life is, since 2020 and 2021 and 2022, is I have about, in my personal flat where I'm filming now, I have about between 6,000 and £10,000 more money than the average person who didn't fix their mortgage. So there are certain asymmetries that exist in your personal life. So understanding interest rates is very important. I think understanding a basic concept such as compounding. I'm going to talk about it briefly. There's a famous investor in the Indian market, the world's he's the biggest investor in India, the most famous. He's called the Warren Buffett of India. Monish Pabrai said the most important lesson you can learn in finance, personal finance, investment, to improve your life exponentially, and your family's life, actually, your descendants' life exponentially, is the idea of compounding. The simplest way to figure this out is by using the rule of 72, which means that the way you think about this is if you get a 10% return and you divide it into 72, you get the number of years that your money doubles. So it's about 7 years. If you get 5% return, 5 into 72 is is a lot less. It's double, so it's 14 years. And if you get 2.5%, you just halve it again. So it's a lot less, right? But I always tend to use a sort of 10% number. So think about asymmetry in terms of what you spend your money on. So if you, like me, this is where I made a mistake, is I use Ubers instead of buying a car. So I spend a bit of money on Ubers. I probably spend between sort of 200 and, in a bad month, £600 on Ubers every month. Well, I'm trying to get that down to 200, 300. Some of it's tax deductible, whatever. But the point is if instead of doing that, I spent the money, let's say I managed to get it to 200 and I'm saving 300, 400, 500 a month, and actually let's balance this out to say on average, it's 400 in a mediumly high month. So let's say I can always save 200 a month, and I put that into Uber stock. And let's say, so that 200 times 12 is 2,400. Let's just call it 2,000 a year. And let's say I expect, this is not financial advice, but I expect Uber stock to do better than 10% a year. So that money's doubling every 7 years. And if you look at that over, if you think about five doubles is 32x, 3,200%. So if you're getting 10% a year, this is just simple maths. You can remember this. Anyone can remember this. Five doubles is 32, 10 doubles is 1,000, right? You know, like I said, 10% a year is 7 years to double. So 35x would be five doubles. Five doubles times 7 years is 35 years. So 32x for that example, that £200 a month example, which is my Uber budget. Maybe it's your coffee budget, maybe it's your eating out budget, maybe whatever it is, your clothes budget. But just think about £200, dollars, euros, wherever you are in the world, a month, about 2,000 to 2,400 a year. I'm going to round it down to 2,000 for math's sake. In 7 years, that'll be 4,000, and in 35 years, that original investment will be 75,000. If you did it every year for 35 years, it's 75,000 times 35 years, roughly. It's not quite that because in year three, you're not going to get 35 years investment. You're going to get 32 years. So it's basically an enormous amount of money. It's not 75. It's more like 1 million or 2 million. And the maths people, you can write down what it is in the comments below. But that's asymmetry in terms of investment. If you can learn compound interest and just learn that rule of 72, divide the number into 72. It's the number of years that your investment or your savings are going to take to double, and then try and figure out, well, how long would it be? How long would it take to get to five doubles with this investment? Reliably, not like Bitcoin or something which might double, but it might also crash. Something like an index fund or whatever is typically about 7% a year. A bond might be 5% at the time of filming. So 5% would be about 12 years, 7% is 10 years, 15% is 3.5 years. Right. So that's it in your personal life. That's finance. But what about health? Well, if you like me and you're a nerd when it comes to learning about health, I like to optimize for performance and growth in every area, so finance as well as health. There have been some studies out there that have claimed that handful of nuts reduces your risk of dying by 30%. That's sort of asymmetric returns because all you have to do is take a handful of nuts. They don't specify if they're organic or non-organic, but a handful of nuts. Where I live in the UK, you can get like a mixed nut selection. This is from Asda, but you can get it from Aldi for, I don't know, £2, and that'll last you maybe if you have a handful every day, maybe 10 days. So you're talking 20p a day can reduce overall risk of mortality, risk of death by 30% every year for your entire life. So 20p a day, I don't know, someone that's very good at maths, what's that times 30? It's like £6 a month. So £70 a year, you can reduce your risk of dying by 30%. Equally, if you walk like 10,000 steps, that probably reduces your risk of dying by another 10, 20%. Maybe doing heavy lifting, like doing weights, it's probably another 10%. So there you go. I mean, I think that's, those two concepts, asynchronous, particularly with the world of work. I think most people think about you have to work in an environment with lots of people in an office, having lots of meetings. Well, actually, I'm an ambivert, and there's nothing more annoying than me than being in meetings for 8 hours a day. And actually, my productivity declines. And if you're a pure introvert, then maybe more than 2 hours a day of meetings probably really affects you. So I'm a big believer in asynchronous work, and when you combine it with asymmetrical risk and reward rate activities, whether that's at work where you save a couple of 100 hours, or whether it's in personal finance where you save 100, 200, 300,000, or it's whether you're thinking about your retirement and funding your kids, being able to help your kids get on the property ladder or whatever. Think about the rule of 72 is fantastic. So they're just some concepts. Hopefully you've watched the end of this video, because I think this is probably the most important video in terms of life improvement, both at work and at home. So if you're one of my descendants, I did think about making this for my daughter, who's she's 19 months now, but hopefully I can give it to her every year. I can make a watch this, and then she'll understand the rule of 72 and asymmetrical risk reward ratios. Equally, you can think about. I'll give one more example. 'Cause this would be important for my daughter and for lots of people watching. Um, so when you do things that are known as fun, fun activities, often it's really important to think about risk as well. I've taken lots of risks in my life. I used to breakdance, I used to skateboard, you know, and do dangerous things like that. And I'm not going to talk about some of the other dangerous things I did, but when you think about a hobby like NFL in America, football in the UK, um, if you do have an injury, the risk of having an injury can be high. I mean, there's other things like base jumping or skiing, or rock climbing, where you have a real risk of dying, unfortunately. Anyone that's a rock fan, the there was a famous rock band's brother. I think it was, I don't know if it's Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam or Chris Cornell from Soundgarden, but I think it might have been Eddie Vedder's brother sadly passed away from a rock climbing incident. I believe he was an experienced rock climber, but this happens, unfortunately. And the same is true of skiing. I know several people that have broken their legs skiing. And that's probably has a material impact on people's life in the short term, medium term, and in the long term. Once you've broken your leg, it is going to affect you for decades in the future. So thinking about how you spend your time, your hobbies, in terms of what's the actual risk of hurting myself versus the reward of doing the activity. I enjoy surfing. There is some risk in surfing. You can get hit by a surfboard. You can drown if you try and get out of your depth in terms of the size of the wave. But generally, if you go with small waves and you're aware of the people around you and you learn to swim, then the risk is fairly low. But thinking about asymmetric risk in terms of your hobbies is pretty helpful. Equally with traveling, unfortunately, I've known several people die traveling. One chap was a lifeguard who went in to save somebody when he was traveling. His friend was drowning. He thought, I'm a lifeguard, went in to save her. He passed away, and sadly, she was saved by somebody else. Um, so, I mean, that's thinking, that's a very difficult situation. I probably would 9 times out of 10, I would have jumped in to save that person. So that's a tragedy. Equally, I think it's always a tragedy when someone dies traveling, but you're at most risk when you travel, because your knowledge of the area is lower, um, and you're in this kind of carefree mode. You're feeling more confident. There's all sorts of reasons why when you're traveling you're at much greater risk. A friend of my brother's sadly was working in Washington, walked around in the wrong neighborhood, and was accosted by thugs who went to mug him, and they ended up killing him. With his girlfriend at the time, and was murdered. It was international news. Alan Sennett was his name, and um, yeah, there's asymmetric risk when traveling. I was in Thailand, and people said the food is safe. Don't worry about food poisoning. A few weeks later, I was in hospital with food poisoning. I came out. The same people said, "Don't worry, you're not going to get it twice." A few weeks later, I got it twice. I was in hospital again, very seriously ill. Flew over to the UK. Luckily, probiotics and all sorts of advanced technologies existed at that point. Had I got so ill 50 years before, it would have been lights out and curtains. So it's important to think about asymmetric risk when you're traveling. I'm not saying, only stay in the safest places, but be very careful about what you do, where you go. Another example is I ended up in Compton, basically in LA, because I took the wrong bus or train when I was younger, and that could have ended up pretty badly. So I think it's really, I've been very lucky that I made mistakes when I was traveling, and fortunately I survived. I think it was just luck, basically dumb luck. But it's important to think about asymmetry in terms of the negatives as well. Positives, you can eat nuts, you can go for walks and do weights, and you'll probably, in general, if you don't do other silly things, you might live a long life, hopefully. If you understand this, the rule 72, and you pick some stocks or financial instruments that generate 10% a year, you'll probably do quite well. And if you want to avoid a sudden death, then something you can do is think about where you travel and how you travel and what you do as a hobby. I'd say they're some broad ideas. Some people might think I'm an idiot. That's fine. I don't mind. Let me know what you think in the comments. If it is particularly negative, I am an individual. I do have thoughts and feelings and moods. Try and be constructive if you have some criticism. But I'll leave it there. Thanks.